I don't know about all of you, but my heart is just so open with listening to all of these speakers this evening, sharing their heart, their soul, these incredible journeys. But we are all here tonight because of all of you. All of you have come for a reason. This is a topic that people struggle with their whole life, right? The unknown. Who are we? What is coming? What is the future? What are we afraid of? And over the course of our lives, we face fear over and over and over again. And all of us speakers would love to be able to help all of you. And that starts by asking all of you, what are your fears? And please share those with us. I know some of the common ones we usually hear are public speaking. And yet, some of you actually took a microphone tonight and you spoke in public, right? You shared with somebody who was up here asking a question. And you faced a fear that so many other people have. And you didn't even realize you did it, right? So what are your fears? Shout them out. Yes. 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 All of these. Wow. Yeah. What about self-actualization? What about whether or not you're actually going to fulfill your purpose in life? Anybody got that one? I remember for years thinking to myself, I was in this big dark room and there were so many doors in there and I had no idea where to go. But if somebody would just hold up a lantern and shine it over the door that I was supposed to go through, that I couldn't run fast enough to get through that door. I wanted to know why I was here. What was I to do in life? Childhood, it's been said sometimes your mess becomes your message in life. Well, I've discovered that's true for me. In my childhood, there was every kind of abuse that you could imagine. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, whatever label you could name, I was living it. I remember living in fear of going home. And so for me, what I would do is I would get on my bicycle after school. And I would ride 25 miles, and I would always end up at the chapel of my church. They always left the chapel unlocked, and I knew that. And there usually wasn't another soul there at all. And so I could go in, and I could be safe. Nobody beat me. Nobody crawled in my bed with me. Nobody told me how awful of a human being I was. Nobody told me the label issues that I had, that I was a girl, and that I wasn't allowed to have a future other than being a wife and a mother, that I couldn't dream. I didn't get those emotions there. I didn't get those labels there. I could sit in silence. And I had been told, okay, there is this higher being that exists out there. My parents at least wanted me to have a spiritual upbringing because they believed that at some point in your life, not now, of course, because we're not doing these things to you, but some point in your life, you might need to have a belief in something bigger. So we're going to make you go through Sunday school and get confirmed and do all of the traditional things that make them look good in the community, that they raised their child properly. And so I'm there sitting in the chapel one day, and I'm having this one-sided conversation, yet again with that unseen being. And it always goes something like this. Why me? Why do I have to go through all of this crap? What did I ever do to deserve this? I'm just a little girl just trying to be me. And I would cry, and I would sob. And many times that I would go, I never heard an answer. But there was one day I did. And I heard a voice, and to this day, I still hear that voice. I hear the intonation of that voice. I hear the words. And I wasn't smart enough at the time to make this crap up. And that voice said to me, "You're going to go through this a little while longer because there's something else coming down the road that you need to be stronger for." And in that moment, I felt a tremendous amount of peace and calm, something I didn't know in my life. And at that moment, I also knew that I had the strength to go through what I was going through. And I got on my bike and I went home. And I survived years of that abuse. But I knew there was an end coming. What I felt through all of that time was fear. Real fear. Fear for my life. Fear for whether or not I was going to end up pregnant by a family member at an age where I hadn't even become a teenager. What does fear actually feel like? We make it into something that's absolutely real, right? I mean, it is just this awful thing. We could put it here on the table. That's fear, right? But the truth of the matter is, fear really isn't any of that. Fear is a construct, as you mentioned. It's something that we can make big. We can turn it into something huge. And yet, we can also make it non-existent. We can take fear and we can talk to it. If we understand that fear is actually something that happens in your body, just like you feel joy, you feel sadness, you feel whatever, you can talk back to it. It is a hormonal thing that happens within you. The cortisol rises within your body. It happens inside this wonderful little thing called the amygdala, part of your brain, and you can actually lessen that fear. When I think in terms of how the fear manifests itself, it usually comes up for some of us in physical ways. Now, I was a child that suffered from extreme anxiety, depression, and I had it so bad as a kid that the very first time that I ever came to Vancouver, I was age 6. And they put me on a plane with my grandmother, and we were flying all the way over to Seattle, Washington, and then we were going to take a ferry up here to Vancouver to visit. And at 6 years old, they put me on the airplane, and I threw up the whole way. I was so scared. I had never flown. I didn't know where I was going, and I was going to be staying with these people that I didn't really know very well. And I was leaving everything I did know. And that's how my body was reacting at age 6 to fear. When I was 10 years old, I went in for eye surgery. And at that point in time, they found out, okay, well, we're going to have to operate on both eyes. You're going to have patches on your eyes for 6 weeks. I was so scared, I started learning how to read Braille. Because what if? Right? What if the surgery doesn't go well? and I never have the opportunity to see again. I want to know how to control things. I want to know how I'm going to survive. I learned how people who are blind eat their meals. They know that their food is at noon or 2 o'clock, 6 o'clock. I learned how to walk, how to navigate. I had counted all the steps in my house, what it took to get from my bedroom down to the refrigerator. I had it all mapped out because my fear was so strong. At 18, I had decided, okay, Mom and Dad had told me I'm a girl, right? I wear that label. That means I'm going to college to meet my husband. I'm not going to college to have a career. They wouldn't even buy me a high school ring because I would end up wearing a wedding band. So now I'm here in college, and I've decided that maybe my parents are wrong. Maybe I can get something for me out of this whole thing other than just a husband. So I decide I want to become a psych major. And I'm going to a major university in the United States where their psych program is so well known that it's really difficult to get in. And the only way that you get into this program, they tell you, is that you must have at least an A average. And then they go to the top of Kaufman Hall and they drop everybody's name down onto the ground who has an A average. And if your name lands face up, you get into grad school. I'm a freshman in college. I'm taking Psych 101. Now, at this moment in time, I'm also trying to deal with all the crap that had been happening to me in my life. The abuse that I had been experiencing, for the most part, had kind of allayed itself around age 15, and then again at 18, there were more incidences out of the blue. So now I decide I got to put myself in therapy. I got to figure this crap out. So I'm really focused on what's going on in therapy, and my head is just this absolute swimming mess of emotion, trying to figure out not what would Mom do anymore, but what would I do when I had a decision to make? What do I want? Who am I? Where am I going? And I am so wrapped up in all of this that I'm not really preparing for any of my classes. And now here it is. It's time for the final in psych. And I've got just the weekend before that exam. And if I don't ace that exam, I'm never going to have a career. And I work myself up into this fear, right? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? My life is going to be over. I'm never going to be anything. I'm going to have to be just what it is Mom and Dad say I'm going to be. And I remember it was Sunday afternoon, and I had just read my psych manual from beginning to end. Now, I never recommend this, because you are reading about all of these different mental disorders, and by the time you get to the end of it, you may very well be suffering from one or more of them. Well, my mom calls me out to have a meal, and so I get up away from my desk, and I start walking to the dining room, and I'm falling into walls, and everything is jumping. I'm trying to look straight, and it's going like that. And I'm leaning. And I'm getting to the dining room only because there's a wall holding me up. And at that point, I get out there and I go, Mom, something's wrong. She said, what? I said, well. So my parents end up taking me to an emergency room at a hospital, and so at that point, the doctors immediately start questioning me. What kind of drugs are you on? And I'm like, I haven't been taking anything. I don't do that crap. What were you drinking? I haven't had a glass of wine in 6 months, and the last one I had was with my dad over a meal. Tell us the truth. I'm like, I am. And so they literally kicked my parents out of the room and said, now tell us the truth. And I said, I am. And they start threatening me with tests. If you don't tell us the truth, we're going to start doing all these medical tests, and they are expensive, and they're not fun, and you're not going to like it. Tell us the truth. I am. So they start putting me through all those tests. They're doing brain scans, they're checking everything they can possibly think of, and they come back and they say, there's absolutely nothing physically wrong with you. What the fuck? So the walls are moving on their own? Then the doctors come in and they go, okay, has this ever happened to you before? Have you ever gotten sick when you get upset about something? Well, heck yeah. That eye surgery I told you about, one of the problems we had after that was that my white blood cell count had gone skyrocketing. They thought I had leukemia. I was going through all kinds of blood work for years after that because they couldn't figure out what was wrong. That's the effect that fear can have on you. Don't let it. So how the heck do we do this? Where does all this fear come from? It comes from all the crap that people put on us. Like Tian was talking about, the constructs, right? The labels. Why do we have labels? We have labels because it helps us to try to figure out who the heck we are in relation to who the heck you are. And if you're not like me, then I can't like you. Right? And we create labels for these things. Xenophobia, a fear of somebody who's not like me. What? Those labels suck. One of the labels I deal with now is the label of interfaith minister. Now, sometimes there's immediate pushback to the word minister. Ooh, I don't want to be near you because if I'm near you, you're going to try to push some belief system on me. Then there's that whole interfaith thing. What the heck does that mean? Well, then you try to put that in a box. Oh, well, that means non-denominational. No, it doesn't. Non-denominational, if one believes in that label, means that you're basically Christian, but you don't want to put yourself in the box of, I'm Catholic, I'm Lutheran, I'm Methodist, or whatever other box there is that's Christian, but it's still non-denominational. When I got my calling into the ministry in 1999, that must have been a heck of a year, Tian. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't go to church on a regular basis. I was a single mom, 2 boys at home. I was a sales trainer, a motivational speaker at that point, talking about things that were related to sales, really. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know what that label was. And what happened for me was a miracle. And we're going to get to that miracle. But there's a few more things I want to talk about first. When we think in terms of fear, how do we overcome it? We've heard a lot of people finding ways to do that. And most of it, we could say, is courage. I'm of a belief that knowledge is power. The more I know about my fear, the less real it seems. So what are your fears? What do you really understand about your fear? Where did it come from? Winston mentioned a fear of spiders. I have that one too. It's a very common one, actually. But is your fear real? Is it based on truth? Or is it just a feeling? In my instance, my brother used to throw spiders on me. My fear is grounded in reality. Now, I've worked a lot on it. I've had those moments where there's a spider and it's on my son's little high chair, and it's a wolf spider, if any of you know them. They are nasty little things. They look at you. And if you move over here, they turn and look at you again. Move over here, and they follow you. Well, this is the time that I learned about chemical warfare. But it took me 45 minutes, and I was sweating like a big dog. The good news, my son was sleeping, and I was trying to move this chair. And if I could pull it out further in the room, maybe I could get behind it. And so then I'd get behind it, and the dang thing would duck again. 45 minutes before the thought went off, and I reached for the can of Raid. That was a big thing for me, because at that moment I realized I could overcome that fear. I'm not as bad, but I won't say I'm completely through with it. It still exists. So where does your fear come from? And once you have that knowledge, then maybe you can mitigate it. How do we do that? Tony Robbins, many of us know of him, got his big start by teaching neuroassociative conditioning. Big term. What it really means is that he would go on television shows and he would promise everybody that he could get you out of your fear. And the way that he would do that is that we create these loops in our head. I'm afraid of this. And because I'm afraid of this, this is what's going to happen to me if I don't do X. And if I don't do X, then this is what's going to happen. And if I don't do that, then it's going to get worse. And then I know my life is going to fall apart. And when my life falls apart, then everything is going to end, and everybody's going to hate me, and I'm going to end up in a trailer down by the river, and my life is going to be over. And what Tony Robbins says is break that loop. Stop telling yourself that stuff. And when you hear yourself telling yourself that stuff, do what it takes to break it. So when he would do it on a stage in about 10 minutes, when a person would start describing their fear, he'd throw water on them. Or he'd do something to break them out of that loop. And so by the time the 10 minutes was up, he could get them to walk up a ladder if that was their fear. So knowledge is power. Know your fear. Face it. Sometimes even speaking it takes away the power the fear has on you. Then you want to mitigate it. What if your fear is of other people, somebody who's different than you? One of the gifts my father gave me growing up is my father was a traveling salesman, and he worked on an international basis, and every now and then he would bring home somebody who lived from a foreign country. And he would allow for one night that evening where that person could talk to us and we could talk to them. And we would have these open conversations about what life was like living in Japan, what it was like to be Muslim. And we would have these amazing moments of natural curiosity. What if, instead of doing this to something that you feel is unknown, what if instead you say, come here, I want to have a conversation. I want to learn from you. How do you view the world? Right? How do you see this? What if we go into what used to be referred to as healthy discourse? We have an open conversation with someone. We ask them questions. They ask us questions. Ultimately, what ends up happening is the two of us enrich each other. We learn and grow from each other. Now, we can choose what we want to do with it, right? We can choose to say, okay, this affirms what I believe, or maybe, just maybe, I've learned something new that makes me question what I've believed before. I remember one time, my father always made sure that as kids, if you wanted something, you had to be able to give us the reasoning why. This was part of him teaching us healthy discourse. So he goes ahead, and I come to him and I say, Dad, I want to use my brother's car in order to go ice skating. And Dad says, tell me why. Okay, now you have to understand, the ice skating rink is just 4 blocks away. And I'm asking to take my brother's car to drive it 4 blocks so that I can go ice skating. So I start explaining to my dad why it is that I should be able to take my brother's car and drive the 4 blocks and skate for maybe a half hour or an hour and then drive it home. 3 hours later, my father and I are still having this conversation. Now, mind you, I could have driven there, already skated, come home, took a shower, and been in bed by this point, right? But that wasn't the point. The point was my father was teaching me about healthy discourse. And so I learned, I grew because of those kinds of conversations. Being able to say, what do I believe and why? Now, once we know what our fear is, and we know that we want to face it, and we know how to mitigate it a little bit, there's one more thing we're going to need: faith. You've heard from a lot of the speakers that faith at some point has come to play. Now, the minute I say faith, there are people here who are already checking out, right? It's like, oh, she's going to start talking religion. Heck no. I'm not that person. I consider myself to be a love luminator, not a minister. I'm here to help people find love, to determine what it is in their life, to grow it, to celebrate it, because I believe love is my truth. So when I talk about faith, what I'm talking about is faith in whatever you think might be out there or in here, right? Because faith could be this being up there. You might want to call it a label like God or Yahweh or whatever word you want to use. But what if you have a belief in yourself? What if you have a belief in your ability to do whatever it is that you want? What if that contract that some people believe that we have when we come into this existence exists in our heart? And all we need to do is to tap into that. And it tells us who we are, what we are, where we need to go. So that belief in faith will give you strength. I would love to be able to tell you all the ways in my life that faith has played out. I've been struck by lightning. That's how I got my calling into a ministry. The miracles that opened up after that were amazing. What I will share with you is look to the universe for the signs that it's speaking to you. When I was trying to get ready to come here, I live in a small little town, and in that small little town, there's no shopping, nothing. So when I need a new dress or I want a new dress, I go online to order them. Well, okay, so I don't look like Twiggy. And I order these dresses and they don't fit. And so finally, I order this last dress and I'm just like, in a couple of days I'm leaving. I don't have any choice to go find something somewhere else. And this dress arrives, and I pull it out of the bag, and I've looked at the listing on the service where I bought this dress. And it's a pretty little pink dress, and it's got some kind of a little pattern on it. And I go, okay, that'll work. We're against a black background, so the pink will show nicely. And then I pull this dress out, and I see the pattern. And the first thing I see is it says, "From God." And I started laughing. And I said, I don't care if I ever wear this dress again. I'm supposed to wear it tonight. So to wrap things up, what I really want to leave you with is, 1, knowledge is power. Understand that. 2, live in a place of natural curiosity. 3, believe in healthy discourse. If you don't understand something, if you don't know what something is, start a conversation. Ask about it. Susan Jeffers wrote a book that says, feel the fear and do it anyway. And it's become a mantra for me. When I feel real fear, it's like, okay, this is just a hormone. It's just cortisol racing through my body. If I want to do this, I'm going to go do that. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And finally, don't look down. To that point, I'm going to share one last story. I was sitting around a campfire with a good friend of mine, and he knew my story. He knew where I came from. And he said, "Hun, I just don't understand why, given your life story, that you don't live down by a river in a van with 7 kids from 7 different dads on drugs and on the system." And he said, "What's the difference between you and everybody else?" And I thought about that, and the only thing I could come up with was, don't look down. Look up, look forward, look inward. Just don't look down.